Welcome all, welcome to this lecture of Advanced Java Programming. Today we will be starting Servlet program, life cycle and all other things. We'll be seeing that. We already seen what are Servlets and its architecture, but now we'll see how it works. Okay, we'll get more deeper into Servlets. Okay, let me first show the disclaimer. Okay, so let's start the lecture. In this, we have already seen what are servlets. We have been an intro to it, and we have seen why we need to build web pages dynamically, right? We have also seen what kind of technologies we will be using in this subject, and then we saw what servlets can do, right? And what is a servlet's job, that also we had seen last time. We saw that it can read the data sent by client through this form. It can read the data through the client in the form of request headers. So there are two types of data that it can read, form data and request headers. It can process or execute, or it can simply generate the results, and it can explicitly send the data back to client in the form of HTML, and also the status codes and response headers. So these are the two types of input that it can get, and these are the two types of output that it can give. Basically, this is the main output. This is just the output for the browser, and this is here, it is the main input. This is just for the input for the processing. Okay, so, and then we saw the difference between servlet and CGI, and we also saw some advantages of servlets, right? Then we saw the Java servlet architecture. Basically, the HTTP protocol is used in order to communicate with the server. Here we will be using HTTP servers, which in fact handle servlet programs, and many times it also has database inside it, or it may be like database may be on some another machine, or maybe in the same machine. So the HTTP protocol is very much important over here. Okay, you will not be executing your Java programs in this like this by saying Java and class name. No, this will not be the way in which you will be executing your Java programs for Java servlet. You will be using web browser, where you will be giving a URI, or it is also known as URL. Okay, where this URL will generate a request using HTTP protocol to the HTTP server. Okay, so web browser will generate a request using HTTP protocol, and then it will get a response through the HTTP server. Okay, so what happens is, it's something like this. See, what happens over here is that, check this out. This is basically the client. Okay, suppose this is basically the client, and this is the server. This is the server. So client sends a request. Okay, and what happens is, server checks for various files that for which the request has come. It will forward the request to that particular source. That resource will execute, and then it will send the response back. It will send the response back. Now see, what happens is, here this request is nothing but a simple HTTP based request. HTTP based request, and here we get the HTTP based HTTP based response. Okay, so what happens is that in this response, suppose we are sending a web page, right? Suppose we are sending index.html as your web page. Okay, in this response. So this response has got HTML also, and on top of it, it has got something called as, this thing is called as the HTTP packet. It is packed inside the HTTP packet. So this HTTP packet basically has all the other information regarding the response, right? Like the status code, it may have, what will it have? It will have specifically the status code information, and if you want to set any cookies, or if you want to set any headers, okay, inside the browser, then these all information will be there inside this HTTP packet, and for which particular client it is going, and all those things will be there, from which particular server it is coming, and all those things will be there inside this HTTP response. What is an HTTP response? It is nothing but a packet, HTTP packet, which has got the output in the form of either the file or the output that is given by this processing of this resource. That may be a servlet, that may be a HTML file, that may be a JSP file. Okay, understand? So basically this is a request response protocol. This is what? This is nothing but we'll be learning how to deal with request response protocol using servlets. Okay, so that is simple Java servlet architecture, which basically deals with HTTP protocol and servlets. Okay, so your communication with the program will happen through HTTP protocol, hypertext transfer protocol. Okay. Okay. Now we saw that these two packages will be used. javax.servlet and javax.servlet.http packages will be used. So this javax.servlet contains generic interfaces and classes, and this javax.servlet.http package contains HTTP specific servlets. So just now we talked that we will be focusing on HTTP server. We will be interacting with the server using HTTP protocol. We will be interacting through browser, right? So the word HTTP is common. So basically we will be dealing with this package a lot, javax.servlet.http, because we want HTTP specific servlets. There are generic servlets also which you can make, but they are very not at all much useful in in practical scenario, in real world scenario. In real world practical scenario, you need HTTP based servlets. Okay, so this interface, javax.servlet.servlet interface, is the main interface through which you basically it happens something like this, that there is this servlet interface, okay, which is basically inherited by the generic servlet class, okay, and which is in turn inherited by basically the HTTP servlet class, okay, which is inherited by HTTP servlet class. So we will be extending this HTTP servlet class. Okay, we can even use this generic servlet. Okay, but for dealing with the applications, web applications that work on browser, we need this HTTP servlet class only. Okay, so we'll be extending this HTTP servlet class basically. And what do we get? We get various methods through these classes which help us. So these methods are basically, see, there are 5 basic methods that we get, okay, through this servlet interface. Through the servlet interface, we get 5 methods: init, service, destroy, get servlet config, and get servlet info. These methods you get from this servlet interface, which are basically implemented by generic servlet. And if you extend this generic servlet, then you don't need to specifically apply those methods. So those are already implemented, but you can extend or override those methods. Okay, now so basically these 3, init, service, and destroy, these 3 are the life cycle methods. What are these? These are life cycle methods of a servlet, and these 3 are basically, most of the time, these 3 are the ones which are used a lot by the user. Okay, so see, init method is used for initializing the servlet. Servlet method is used to process a client's request, and the servlet is terminated by calling the destroy method. So see, init method is called only once in the lifetime. Similarly, destroy method is also called only once in the lifetime, whereas this service method is called n number of times. Okay, it is called n number of times, n times during the lifetime of the servlet. Okay, and the work of the service method is to forward the request to appropriate method as per the as per the method used by the client to generate the request. So we'll see how that is used. But right now, just remember the init is executed only once. Destroy is also executed only once. So when is the init executed? The first time when the request comes for a servlet, or when the servlet is loaded into the memory, at that time the init runs. Similarly, when the servlet is removed from the memory, from the JVM, at that time this destroy method is called. And the service method is called every time the client requests for that particular servlet. Okay. So finally, the servlet is garbage collected by the garbage collector of the JVM. And at that time, that before actually collecting it, it calls the destroy method. So we have seen this, that init method is called only once when the servlet is first created. Then when is it basically invoked, or when is it executed? When a user first invokes a URL corresponding to the servlet. So when a first request comes, once the servlet is loaded, and when the first request comes for the servlet, at that time normally the init method gets executed. Okay, or basically normally it gets executed once once that servlet is loaded, or when the server is first started. So what happens is, when the server first started, it may load the applications, and when it loads the applications, at that time it may load the servlet. So at that time, but normally it is not that. It is called when the first request comes in. Okay. And so basically what happens is, when a user invokes a servlet, when a request comes from the client to the server for a particular servlet, what happens is a single instance of each servlet gets created. Okay, and each user request is resulting into a new thread. So you see, servlets are basically thread based. Servlet run on thread. So there is only a single request. It's like this, that there is a client. Check this out. There is a client which sends a request to the server. Okay, there is a client, and there is a particularly a server. Now see, what happens is, there might be a resource. Okay, there might be a resource. So the request comes from the client, and server sees that there is a resource. So it sends a new thread on it. It executes a new thread on it. At the same time, it might happen that there may be different requests from the different clients, right? There may be different requests from different clients. So what to do in that case? So obviously what will happen is, it will generate new threads. Okay, it will generate new threads for that particular requests, but the instance will be same. Suppose this is let's suppose that this is a servlet 1. So the servlet is the same servlet. That instance or object is also same, which is loaded into memory, but the threads that run on it are different. You see, so your servlet basically runs on multiple threads. Okay, your servlet basically runs on multiple threads, right? And that thread will be handed off to a particular particular method. That particular method, there may be lots of methods, right? So what happens is, the thread will be particularly given to that particular method, and that particular method is either do get or do post. That depends on how you generate the request. Okay, so this thing basically this do get or do post is defined inside our code. We'll see how to define it, and depending on that, the request of the client will be serviced. Okay, now see, what happens is, This init method basically is used to create or load some data that can be used throughout the life cycle of the servlet. Okay, and so the definition of init method is like this: public void init, and it can throw servlet exception. This is how we define the init method. Okay, and similarly, then there is a service method, which is the main method to perform the actual task. So who is calling this service method and who is calling this init method basically? So you see what happens is, let me show you. What happens is that basically when the client sends a request to the server, what is server? Server is nothing but there is a container. This server has got something called as a servlet container, where all the servlets are being loaded. All the servlets will be running inside the servlet container. So when client requests a particular, client sends a particular request, say for example for servlet 1, so the request gets generated from the client side. Okay, this is the request generated, and the server gives it to the servlet container to see which particular servlet has to be executed, and then servlet container checks that okay, for this particular servlet the request has come, so it will do one thing. It will do what? It will generate two things. Two objects will be generated. Okay, and these two objects are basically, let me show you, these are, what are these two objects? One object is called as the request object, and the other object is called as the response object. Okay, so it generates these two objects, okay, and these two objects are being given to that particular servlet for execution. Okay, so that particular servlet executes, and it can then reply to the client, which is nothing but called as the response. Okay, what is that called as? That thing is called as the response. Okay, now see, this is suppose the servlet 1. Okay, so what happens when you put the URL into the client side? You generate a request, and that request goes to the server on some particular port number, right? So for example, here the port number that we will be using would be 8080, right? Then server checks that port number and sees, okay, it has to be sent to the servlet container, and so basically mostly the servlet container itself is running on this port number, and server and servlet container both are same in most of the cases, right? So that's why it sees, and then it checks, okay, that we have to give the control to this particular servlet 1. So what does it do? It creates two objects. One is the HTTP servlet request object, another is HTTP servlet response object. Which two objects are created? Yes, these two objects are created: HTTP servlet request object and HTTP servlet response object. You see, these much things are different. These two things, request and response. So these two objects, this request object belongs to this class, and response object belongs to this particular class. Okay, and these two objects are given to the servlet 1, and inside that servlet 1, so how does it define where it to be given? So basically, this service method sees what is the type of the request, and accordingly it gives that that request and response objects to either the do get method, okay, or it gives to do post method, because that sees what is the type of the request. There are different methods through which you can generate the request. Okay, so the methods of the generating request are get type, there is a get type, then there is a post type, then there is a put type, then there is a delete type. Okay, and so there are about 8 to 9 types of generating the request. Okay, this is how the different ways in which you can generate the request. So see, the name itself says get means get some resource. Post means put some post some data to the server. Put means put some file or put update something. Delete means to remove something. Okay. So there are about 8-9 types, but mostly we will be using these two types of generating the request. So it sees that what kind of request has come, and accordingly it sends this request and response object to either do get method or to do post method. Okay, and do get and do post will get both of these objects. Now, why are these objects really needed? These objects are needed if we are getting some data. So, for example, if you are getting some data, suppose this is a request, not a simple request, but this is request plus the data. Now, this data may be coming from what? From a form. So, we call it as a form data. Okay. So, this form data will be accessible from this request object, HTTP server request object. And what about output? If you want to give the output from the servlet, then that output will be given directly to the client using this HTTP servlet response object. So these two objects are very much needed. Request object in order to read the data from the coming from the client, and response object in order to give the data to the client or to display the data to the client. Okay, so this request object is used for input. Okay, and obviously the response object is used for output. Okay, so that's why these two objects are very much necessary to be given by the servlet container to the servlet for which the request has come. Okay, understand? This is how the whole process works. So every time what happens when the request comes, it generates two request and response objects and give it to that servlet's service method, and service method then decides to which particular method it is to be given, either to do get or to do post or some other method, right? Understand? That depends on what type of request you generated. Okay, so we'll see how to generate these different methods. Okay, we'll see that. Fine, but this is whole process that happens. What happens? You put an URL or you generate a request through form. Okay, and that will generate the request, and there might be some form data, and it will send that particular request to the particular port number of the server, which can have contain inside it servlet container, or it may itself be the servlet container, server and servlet container. It generates request response object and gives it to the servlet one's service method. See, if this request is coming for the first time, then what happens? The sequence is like this. The first init method gets invoked, then service method gets invoked. This is the sequence. And for the rest of the requests coming in, for the second, third, or nth request, the control will directly go to service. Okay. So this init method is run only one time in the life cycle of the servlet. Understand? This is how your basically the request response protocol works, and this is how your init, service, and destroy method. So now you will say, when will this destroy method get invoked? Well, that is automatic. That will happen. That's destroy method will happen when this servlet one is removed from the servlet container's memory. When it is to be garbage collected, at that time that destroy method will invoke. It will not get invoked on a particular request. It will not get invoked by the user. It will get automatically invoked when the servlet one is garbage collected, or it is just removed from the memory. You see? So remember this thing. Init method gets executed one time only, once only, and when specifically when the first time the request comes for that particular servlet. And then the service method gets invoked, and it decides to which particular method these two objects are to be passed, right? And for the next coming request, subsequent request, init method will not get invoked. The service method will get invoked every time, and it will forward the request to either do get or to do post. Okay, So that is how you basically this init, service, and destroy methods run. Okay. So see what happens. Service method is the main method to perform the actual task. So the servlet container calls the servlet method to handle the requests coming from the client, that is browsers, and to write the response back to the client. So the server receives, each time what happens? Server receives a request for a servlet. Server spawns a new thread and calls the service method. Okay. What happens every time? Every time there are, let's say, lots of clients requesting into the server. So what will it do? It will make a new thread and will send it to the service method of this particular servlet. Okay. And this is how the service method is defined. Public void service. It will have two objects to it. See, I told you that it gets two objects, right? So these are the two objects: servlet request object and servlet response object. These are the super classes of HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, right? So obviously those two objects can be given to these two variables because these are super classes. Okay, and it declares that it can throw servlet exception or IO exception. Okay, so basically service method also checks whether the HTTP request type belongs to which type. So see, these are the various types: get, post, put, delete, right? So accordingly it will call either do get or do post or do put or do delete. That we have now, these we have to define in our servlets. These we have to define in our what? In our servlet that we have made. Okay, if we don't define, suppose if we don't define, let's suppose that if you don't define do get and you are trying to generate a request using method get, then obviously that will give you an error. Okay, I'll show you that how that happens. Similarly, if you are trying to invoke do post, you are trying to generate a request using method post, but you don't have a method called do post, right? Then obviously that will not get serviced. So this is service method. Okay, and then comes destroy method. The destroy method is called only once at the end of the life cycle of the servlet. And why do we require this? Because this will help us to close many things, like to close database connections if we have any open connections remaining in the application. It may even halt background threads. It may even help you write cookie list or hit counts to the disk. For example, how many users had how many users had actually visited the site till this point of time. That kind of hit counts may be stored to disk or to database. Okay, and it will help you perform other such cleanup activities. Okay, so basically after this destroy method is called, the servlet object is marked for garbage collection, and thus after that the actual object will be garbage collector. Okay, and the declaration is like public void destroy. Okay, so see what happens is this is the figure of your typical life cycle scenario. What happens? And that this is the web server, and whenever the client sends a request, okay, let's say the client, and this is what this is the server. So whenever the client sends a request to the server, okay, it checks if it is for the first time, it sends the request to init method. It sends the servlet container sends the request to the init method, and then it sends the request to the service method. And for the next time, for next request, for new requests coming in by the same client or from different clients, okay, let me show it like this. This is from another client. This is also from another client. So what happens? For each new request that is sent to this servlet container, right? It will basically generate a new thread, and that thread will be given to the service method. That thread will be given to the service method. Okay. See, so different threads basically pass through this service method. Why? Because there will be lots of n number of requests coming in for the servlet, and each time those requests will be created into different threads. Okay, since Java uses multi-threading concept. Okay, and the service method gets every time invoked. You see, thread A, thread B, thread C. And the last time, whenever the garbage collection is happening, at that time destroy method will be called automatically by the servlet container. That is not up to us. It's not like that you pass a request from the client and then the destroy method gets called. No, this scenario is not at all possible. Okay. This is how your lifecycle methods behave. Understand what are the different methods? Init method, service method, and destroy method. And this service method will in turn call either the doGet method, or it might call doPost method, or it might call doDelete method in this way. Right? Understand? This is how it happens. You send a request, it goes to the service method, and then it goes to either doGet or doPost or doDelete, depending upon your type of that you send over here. Okay, so these are different types of service methods. If you want to see it how that works, let me show you how the lifecycle methods work. So see, this example is there. In this, okay, let me do one thing. Let me make this. Let me just remove this, delete this, and I'll make a new program that will work on lifecycle methods. Okay, so I say new Java web applications and next, and this is, I'll say P02 lifecycle. Okay, and say next and finish. Let's finish it. So see, this lifecycle program has got index.html, right? But right now we don't need this, so we'll add one servlet. We want to make a servlet, so I say right click new and servlet. So here the servlet is lifecycle servlet. We call it as what? We give it the name as lifecycle servlet. The class name is lifecycle servlet. It's a next, add the information to deployment descriptor, and the URL pattern would over be here will be life or simply life cycle. Give it the name as life cycle, and then we finish it. Okay, so check this out. This life cycle method has got this life cycle servlet has got some, you know, some extra code. Let me remove all that extra code. And okay. Now see, it already has got a doGet method right inside it. It already has got the, let me do one thing, let me shorten this code so that you people can easily understand it. So this is a lifecycle servlet, okay, which extends HTTP servlet, and there is a doGet method. And what about lifecycle methods? Okay, so let's make lifecycle methods. We will say public void init. Okay, what does it throw? Yes, init method basically throws servlet exception, right? It can throw servlet exception. So let's declare that it throws servlet exception, right? And in this lifecycle method, just a minute, let me just align this code. Okay. in this init method, what we'll do is we'll simply print system dot out dot println, and we'll say, what will we say? We'll say that Servlet life cycle Servlet started. That's what we say. Okay. And similarly, we also have the destroy method. Destroy method does not throw anything, right? And here we'll say life cycle Servlet ended. That's what we say. We say life cycle Servlet ended. And we do not override. See, we have override. See, this init method is coming from HTTP Servlet. Okay. Remember, this is life cycle Servlet is our class, which is extending HTTP Servlet. So this init method and destroy methods come from this HTTP Servlet. And those we are overriding. Okay. But there is this service method also that we do not override. Which method? The service method. That we will not be overriding it. Why? Because that service method has got the code that will check what kind of request is coming, and accordingly it will forward the request to this do get. We do not override the service method. Make sure you do not override the service method. Okay. Even though you know that this is how it is declared, you do not at all override it. Understand this? Yes. So you can override init method and destroy method. So now let's see how it behaves. Check this out. What we will do is here we will have to put some output. In this do get method, we will have to give some outputs. How do we give the output? Check this out. I give the output like this. In this do get method, first what I will do is I will first set the content type of the response. So first I will say response dot set content type. Now what is this? This set content type basically sets the MIME type. Since our client is working on browser and he sends the request through browser, the browser will understand only HTML part or some specific MIME types other than HTML. So here we say that the response that this Servlet will send will be of text/HTML type. This is a MIME type that specifies that the response coming in will be simple text or HTML inside it, so that the browser can render the HTML and show the output. Once it has set the response content type, then it will then we will try to get the out object of the print writer type from the response. We will say response dot get writer. Okay, so through the response object only we get the writer, so that through that we can send the response to the client. Understand? So what will we do? We'll simply say now first these two lines are, remember these two lines are always to be used. Okay, whenever you want to give the output, we always use these two lines. Okay, and now we will say out dot println in this double quotes. Here we use h1 tag, and here we say hello world from do get method, or from with say life cycle Servlet. Hello world from the life cycle Servlet. Okay, that's what we say. That's it. So now check this out. How do we run this particular Servlet? This life cycle Servlet can run through this HTML file also. How? Specifically, we have to give the link to it, right? So let me just put the title over here, life cycle Servlet. Then here I will put a link. Okay, so I will put anchor tag. What will I put? anchor tag, and I'll remove all these things. And in anchor tag, I'll put the link to life cycle Servlet. And how do we put the link? By saying href, by specifying hyperreference to be what? To be life cycle. You remember this URL that we had given? This was the URL pattern that we had given to that particular lifecycle servlet class. So the same URL pattern we are giving here as a hyperreference. Okay. So then it will invoke this servlet. When we click on this URL, it will invoke that servlet. So let me run this particular project. Okay, let me run this particular project. I'll say run. When I run the project, obviously this index.html gets run, and when we click it, it will invoke this lifecycle servlet for the first time. Okay, so let me show you the output also. Let us just dock it over here. Okay, and in the output specifically, yes, here in Glassfish server, see this Glassfish server tab, inside this output tab. Okay, inside this output tab of this Glassfish server tab, you will get to see the output here from this particular lifecycle server. Which output you will get to see? The system.out.println output. This system.out.println will print onto the console of the server. So this will not be visible to client. This output will not be visible to client, but it will be visible to us as developers. Okay, so check this out. When I specifically see it has started, and it has started this index.html, right? This link is given. So as soon as I click on this, check this out. You check the, as soon as I click on it, okay, so it is saying life cycle resource is not available. Okay, we'll have to see what is the issue. Lifecycle servlet. Okay, everything is there. Lifecycle URL is also there. I think we have given proper URL. Let's check. URL was not proper. I go back, I refresh. Now you check this out. You check the output properly. See what happens when. Let me show you the output. Okay, please keep checking the output over here in this part. Okay, so I click on this, and here you get to see the output as lifecycle servlet started. You see that? And you also get to see this output. So this output is basically what? Visible to client. And this output is basically visible to only developer in this development environment only, in this IDE only, nowhere else. Okay, and this output is visible to client. This output is given by which method? By the doGet method. And this line of output is given by the what? Init method. Right? Now check this out. What happens when I stop this particular? This is a Glassfish server, right? Check this out. This is a Glassfish server, which can be stopped from here by this button. So if I click this button, so it will start stopping the, so it will, it will go on to stop the server. So I click on this, and as soon as it goes on, it initiates the server shutdown. Check this out. At some point, it shows that lifecycle servlet ended. You see this? Here the lifecycle servlet has started. Then we initiated its server shutdown. So as soon as the server shutdown happened, it started shutting down some things. And then it started collecting, garbage collecting all the servlets. And as soon as it had to collect the this lifecycle servlet, this line got printed. Lifecycle servlet ended. You see that? So this will get logged. This output, this lifecycle servlet started, this lifecycle servlet ended. This things will get logged onto the server side. User client will not be able to see it. It's as simple as that. And now once the server has stopped, now if you try to refresh this, you will not get the output. You will not at all get the output. It will say waiting for localhost, and then it will say can't reach this page. You see? Okay. So that's it. Your server is needed in order to run the in order to run your program. Okay, so this was lifecycle servlet. I hope you people understand it. Okay, so let's make it for the end of the day. And if you're at all any doubt, you people can ask me. Okay. Okay, Dhruval is asking if connection get disconnected and after if client requests, then init method gets invoked. You just now show that, Dhruval, right? I just stopped the server and you were not able to get the, you're not able to get the output itself. So output is available only if the server is started. Okay, and once the server has loaded the servlet, at that time only you get the output. And when do you get the input? Sorry, when do you get the output of init method? When the first request comes. So let me again show it to you people. Let's just make this clear. I'm again running this lifecycle servlet application. Okay, so I run this. Okay, and check this out. Here you will get to see. In this part, you will get to see the output of Glassfish server. Okay, let me just clear this so that you get here. Okay, here are you seeing here the output is coming by this output is of Glassfish server. Okay, so as soon as it loads the application, check this out, it has loaded the application P02 lifecycle, and soon you will get to see, here it is, here we got to see. So I'll just I'll keep this over here so that you can see the output over here. Now make your focus over here, keep your focus on this part. Okay, this is the output of Glassfish server. So here I click on the lifecycle servlet, I click it. In the first time I'm clicking it, so it says lifecycle servlet started, and also it gives you the output. Now if I refresh, check this out, I'm refreshing here over here. Okay, I'm refreshing over here, but I don't get to see this output again. Why? This is only once this lifecycle servlet started, this output will come only once in the lifecycle of this servlet. Okay, so even though I refresh it, even though I give it again, even though I enter this address again and again, that will not work. That will not give me this output again and again. No, this will come only once because init method gets invoked only once. That only first time. That's also first time in the life cycle. And now if I stop the server, it will start shutting down, and here it is. Here you get the output of. So you see, you get this output. Server shut down. This life cycle servlet started once in the life cycle, and then this output life cycle servlet ended. That's also once in the life cycle. You see that? And now since the server is stopped, if we refresh from here, if you refresh, you don't get any output. You see? So that's what is the life cycle of a servlet. Okay. Any doubts? You people can ask me. Okay. Let me stop the recording. We can have interaction.